If you touch her again, I swear I'll tear your whole empire down." The voice cut through the jazz and fake laughter, silencing the glittering ballroom. Richard Crane turned, smirking coldly. "A crippled ex-soldier, discharged early, thinks he can teach me manners?" he mocked. But the retired SEAL stood tall, eyes steady. "Maybe I'm no longer in uniform," he said, "but I still know what honor means." The room froze, and for the first time that night, the billionaire's smile disappeared. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more. The night was cold, clear, and mercilessly elegant. Through the glass walls of the Blue Horizon Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, New York glittered like a city made of mirrors, every surface reflecting ambition, every reflection concealing fear. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers hung like frozen rain, scattering light across marble floors and tables draped in white silk. A jazz quartet played softly, each note floating between the clink of crystal glasses and the murmurs of moneyed laughter. Ethan Cole stood near the exit, half-shadowed by a gilded column. At 38, he carried the kind of silence only men who've seen war can wear. His frame was broad, the build of a man trained to endure. Shoulders squared, stance still military despite the navy blue security uniform. A faint limp in his right leg betrayed an old injury, the result of a mission gone wrong in Kandahar. His hair, short and streaked with early gray, framed a face both disciplined and weary. The faint stubble along his jaw didn't disguise the sharpness of his cheekbones or the depth of his eyes that had once scanned desert horizons for danger, now reduced to watching over champagne towers and billionaires. He didn't belong here, and he knew it. These people, their polished shoes, their laughter laced with vanity, were from a world that measured worth in dollars and not in decency. Yet Ethan needed the job. The VA checks were late again, and rent didn't wait for courage. The crowd glittered with New York's elite, CEOs, investors, politicians, and their perfumed wives. Tonight's charity gala claimed to raise funds for underprivileged youth, though everyone knew it was really about photographs, headlines, and networking. At the center of it all stood Richard Crane, 52, a man who had turned arrogance into an art form. He was tall, over 6 feet, with silver-streaked hair styled immaculately, his tailored black tuxedo hugging a body kept trim by vanity and wealth. His jaw was square, his smile polished to perfection, but his eyes were small and cruel, like those of a predator who enjoyed the kill more than the chase. The founder of Crane Dynamics, a global software empire, Richard had spent decades building his fortune and reputation. Power had shaped him into something smooth and sharp, like glass, beautiful from afar, but dangerous to touch. Beside him stood his wife, Amelia Crane, a striking woman of 28, carrying the fragile beauty of someone who had once known freedom. Her dress, an elegant turquoise silk gown, flowed around her like a whisper. Her blonde hair, curled loosely, fell over her shoulders, and her porcelain skin glowed beneath the chandeliers. Yet behind her soft smile lingered something hollow, as if she were trying to remember how to breathe. Her hand rested protectively on her rounded belly, 6 months pregnant. Every movement she made was careful, measured, as though she lived in constant fear of breaking. Something unseen. Ethan noticed her the moment she entered, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she looked tired, the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too many invisible bruises. He'd seen that same look on soldiers returning from war, those who'd survived but left something of themselves behind. The orchestra shifted to a livelier tune, Waiters drifted between tables with silver trays. Richard lifted his glass. Toasting investors gathered around him, his laughter echoing too loudly. Amelia stood by his side, quiet, smiling when required. She seemed to shrink as his voice rose. Ethan's gaze swept the room methodically. Years of training made him catalog details automatically: exits, sight lines, potential threats. It was a habit he could never unlearn. But tonight, what drew his attention wasn't danger from outside. It was what simmered quietly at the center of the room. The incident happened so quickly it barely seemed real. A waiter passed behind Amelia, and her elbow brushed the stem of a wine glass. Burgundy liquid cascaded down the front of Richard's tuxedo, dark against the white linen shirt. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The band faltered. A fork clinked. Someone gasped softly. Then came the slap. It was sharp and clean, echoing like a gunshot across the ballroom. Amelia staggered back, one hand flying to her cheek. A crimson line blossomed at the corner of her lip. The crowd froze, not out of outrage, but discomfort. Eyes darted, heads turned away, conversations resumed awkwardly, as if politeness could erase violence. The band, uncertain, began to play again. Ethan's chest tightened. He could taste copper on his tongue, the ghost of adrenaline waking something old and dangerous inside him. The same surge he'd felt years ago in Helmand Province, when the choice was always the same: act or watch someone die. Richard's voice cut through the air, low and venomous. "Do you have any idea what this suit costs?" He dabbed at the wine stain with a white napkin, his tone calm but deadly. "You've embarrassed me in front of the board, Amelia." I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was an accident." Ethan took a step forward before catching himself. His superior, Marcus Dean, a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and the permanent flush of cheap whiskey on his cheeks, shot him a warning glance from across the hall. Marcus had worked private security for 20 years. His motto was simple: never get involved with the guests. He shook his head slightly, mouthing, "Don't." Ethan froze, jaw clenched. His hand instinctively brushed against the scar that ran along his thigh, a souvenir from an IED that had ended his military career. He remembered the day they pulled him from the wreckage, the sand caked with blood, the ringing in his ears. His best friend, Connor, hadn't made it. Ethan had promised himself that if he ever got out, he'd make every life matter. But now here he was, watching another kind of battlefield, where the wounds didn't bleed but still killed something vital. Amelia tried to step away, her shoulders shaking. Richard caught her wrist, his fingers pale against her skin. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he hissed. Her lips trembled. "Please, not here." The sight burned into Ethan's mind, the strength in Richard's grip, the way Amelia flinched, not from pain, but from habit. This wasn't the first time. He knew that pattern too well. Around them, the guests kept pretending. One woman sipped her champagne, whispering to a friend, eyes darting back like a voyeur too afraid of guilt. A man in a navy suit glanced at his watch and turned away. The collective cowardice was suffocating. Ethan's pulse thundered. His training screamed to intervene, but his job screamed louder. Stay out of it. He forced himself to breathe, to calculate. Every instinct warred with logic. "It's not my business," he told himself. "Not my world." Then Amelia looked up. Just for a second. Her eyes met his across the hall. They were the palest blue he had ever seen. Cold, frightened, pleading without words. That look pierced through every wall he'd built to survive. He exhaled sharply, jaw tightening until it hurt. Somewhere inside, the soldier who had once carried fallen brothers through gunfire stirred again. Richard released her wrist, straightening his suit. "Smile," he muttered, forcing a grin as a photographer approached. Amelia did as told. She turned toward the camera, her face already masked, the welt on her cheek barely hidden by powder. The flash went off. The image was perfect on the surface. Ethan's hands curled into fists. His supervisor's voice buzzed through the earpiece. "Keep your post, Cole. Don't make a scene." But Ethan barely heard it. His heart pounded with the rhythm of something old and familiar. Protect, defend, act. When the laughter returned, when the music resumed its hollow rhythm, Ethan realized he was still staring at Amelia Crane. Her eyes no longer met his. She had withdrawn into herself again, like a candle shrinking under glass. He looked around the ballroom, hundreds of faces pretending to see nothing. He saw power without conscience, beauty without mercy, civilization without soul. And in that moment, something inside him, something he thought had died in the desert, came alive. He didn't know what he would do yet, only that he couldn't look away. Outside, snow began to fall, thin and silent, dusting the glass dome of the blue horizon like ash. Inside, beneath the chandeliers, Ethan Cole stood motionless, watching the woman in the turquoise dress touch her cheek and force another hollow smile. And somewhere deep in his chest, the soldier whispered a single command: "Not tonight." Outside the ballroom, the air was colder, thinner, carrying the metallic tang of tension and perfume. The laughter and jazz from inside felt miles away, muffled by heavy glass doors that separated luxury from conscience. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as the echo of that slap still replayed in his mind, sharper than any explosion he'd heard overseas. He stood near the marble hallway, fists clenched at his sides, watching the hotel manager, Marcus Dean, argue in hushed tones with two event coordinators. They looked panicked, whispering about public image and damage control, as if the only casualty tonight was reputation. Ethan's body still trembled with restrained fury. He had seen brutality before, but this, the elegance, the hypocrisy, made it worse. Marcus approached, his face flushed, his tie loosened. "Cole," he hissed, "you just threw away your job. You don't talk to guests, especially that guest. You get me?" Ethan's voice came out, low, steady, like a blade scraping stone. "He hit a pregnant woman." Marcus rubbed his temples. "You think I don't know that? But this isn't your damn battlefield. Here we keep our mouths shut. Security means silence." He jabbed a finger toward Ethan's chest. "Now go to the control room and do your job quietly before you make it worse." Ethan didn't answer. His expression didn't change, but a storm gathered behind his eyes. The security control room sat behind the ballroom, filled with flickering monitors showing every corner of the hotel. Ethan entered and closed the door behind him, shutting out the false laughter outside. Screens displayed different angles: the glittering tables, the polished shoes, the slow sway of the chandelier, and in one corner, the frozen frame of Amelia Crane, pressing her hand to her bruised cheek. He stared at the footage, his reflection trembling across the screen, and in that reflection he saw another version of himself. The man kneeling in the dust of Kandahar, the explosion ringing, his best friend Connor lying still. He'd promised himself he would never again watch someone be hurt and do nothing. Yet here he was. He reached for the control panel and inserted a small black USB drive from his pocket. It was military issue, waterproof, encrypted, one of the few things he still carried from his service days. His fingers moved fast, copying the footage from every angle that caught the moment of the slap. He knew the hotel would try to erase it within hours, maybe minutes. He wouldn't let that happen. As the data transferred, the door opened with a soft click. Naomi Patel, the assistant front desk manager, stepped inside. She was in her early 30s, petite with dark hair tied in a neat bun and skin the color of bronze polished by years under the sun of Mumbai. Her black blazer was perfectly pressed, but the worry in her almond eyes gave her away. Naomi had worked at Blue Horizon for 6 years. Loyal, efficient, known for calming angry guests and impossible situations. But tonight, even she looked shaken. "Ethan," she whispered, "Marcus says you're in trouble. They're calling Richard Crane's legal team already. You shouldn't be near this." He turned from the monitor. "You saw it, Naomi. You saw what he did." "I did," she admitted, glancing at the screens. "But that man owns half the companies in this room. If you go against him, he'll ruin you." Ethan gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "You can't ruin what's already broken." Naomi's gaze softened. She'd always sensed something fractured in him. The way he avoided small talk, the limp he never explained, the far-away look whenever he heard fireworks outside. "Be careful," she said finally. "This place protects power, not people." She left, her perfume lingering like a warning. Moments later, a chime sounded from one of the cameras. Ethan looked up. The feed from Hallway East showed Amelia Crane, escorted by a nurse in a white uniform. Her posture was fragile but upright, one hand on her belly, the other brushing her hair back shakily. Richard wasn't with her. He was being ushered into the VIP suite by hotel staff and PR handlers, probably to cool his temper. This was the first moment she'd been alone. Without thinking, Ethan pocketed the USB, straightened his uniform, and left the control room. The hallway outside was quiet, except for the hum of the central air conditioning. Amelia leaned against the wall near a row of tall orchids. Up close, she looked even more delicate, skin pale against the turquoise dress, eyes rimmed red but still clear. The nurse, Evelyn Moore, a woman in her 50s with kind lines around her eyes, adjusted the band on her wrist. Evelyn had worked at Blue Horizon's in-house medical station for decades. She was short and slightly plump, her gray hair tied back in a bun, her manner brisk but gentle. "You should rest, Mrs. Crane," Evelyn murmured. "I can call a car to take you home." Amelia shook her head faintly. He'll want to stay longer." Her voice cracked. Evelyn's brows knitted. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to." "I don't get to decide," Amelia said quietly. Ethan cleared his throat softly to announce himself. Both women turned. Evelyn looked startled but recognized his uniform. "Security?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said, keeping his tone even. "I just wanted to make sure Mrs. Crane was all right." Amelia hesitated, studying his face. The strong jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the steadiness in his gaze. He didn't look like a hotel guard. He looked like someone who'd seen too much and learned to speak only when it mattered. "I'm fine," she said, though her hand still trembled slightly. "It was just an accident." Ethan shook his head once, barely perceptible. "No, ma'am, it wasn't." Evelyn excused herself to fetch water, leaving them briefly alone. The silence between them felt heavy, but strangely safe. Amelia exhaled shakily. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said, eyes downcast. "He'll make sure you lose your job." Ethan's voice softened, the edges of his anger fading into quiet resolve. "I've lost worse." "Why did you do it?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Because everyone else didn't." For the first time, Amelia looked at him fully. There was gratitude there, but also fear. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Richard, he doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget." Ethan nodded slowly. "Neither do I." Footsteps echoed at the far end of the corridor. Marcus appeared, accompanied by another guard, Jorge Ramirez, a younger man in his 20s, tall and wiry, with buzz-cut hair and nervous energy. Jorge respected Ethan like an older brother, having heard the stories of his service from other guards. His dark eyes flicked between them anxiously. "Boss says to get back to post," Jorge murmured. Marcus frowned. "Cole, you're done for the night. Hand over your badge and wait in the staff lounge until I figure this out." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He nodded to Amelia and stepped back. "Take care of yourself, ma'am." Her lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. Back in the staff corridor, Ethan removed his earpiece and shut it off. He knew Marcus would file a report, maybe even suspend him. It didn't matter. He had the footage. The truth was safe. For now. In the employee lounge, the hum of an old vending machine filled the silence. Ethan sat heavily on the worn couch, the USB drive cold in his hand. Outside the narrow window, snow continued to fall, blanketing the city that pretended to care. He thought of Amelia's eyes, the kind of fear that had no sound, and he felt the old pulse of duty stir again. He'd been trained to fight enemies with guns, not suits and money. But cruelty was cruelty, no matter how well dressed. As the clock neared midnight, Naomi returned quietly, holding a thermos of coffee. "They're sending her home soon," she said, sitting across from him. "Her doctor's coming to check on her. Richard's staying behind for press photos." Ethan gave a dry laugh. Perfect ending for him. Naomi looked at the drive in his hand. "You should destroy that, Ethan. If they find out you took footage, it's theft." He turned the small device over in his palm, the metal glinting in the dim light. "Sometimes the truth's worth stealing." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded, understanding that there was no changing his mind. "Then you better be ready for what comes next," she said softly. Ethan looked out the window again, snow swirling like ash over the sleeping city. His reflection stared back, a man who had spent years obeying orders, now standing on the edge of defiance. He didn't know what he would do tomorrow, only that silence was no longer an option. Outside, the last guests began to leave the gala, their laughter echoing faintly through the marble halls. Inside the lounge, Ethan Cole sat alone, his hand closing around the USB drive that could topple a king. The soldier within him was awake again, and this time he had found a new battlefield. The corridor outside the ballroom had gone silent, emptied of laughter and music, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the smell of spilled wine clinging to the air. A few last guests had drifted away, their diamond shoes clicking across marble floors, oblivious to the chaos that lingered behind them. The hotel lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow, polished glass reflecting the empty opulence of a night built on lies. In a small guest lounge near the back hall, Amelia Crane sat alone on a velvet sofa, her turquoise dress crumpled at the edges, her eyes red and swollen. The makeup meant to perfect her image now streaked faintly down her cheeks. She held a glass of water untouched, her trembling fingers leaving small prints of condensation on the surface. The nurse, Evelyn Moore, had left her a few minutes earlier to speak with the hotel physician. Amelia stared at her reflection in the tall mirror opposite her. What she saw wasn't herself, not the woman from magazine covers or charity galas. The woman staring back was fragile, frightened, a ghost wearing borrowed grace. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his figure filling the frame with quiet certainty. His navy uniform was wrinkled, and there was still tension in the way his jaw locked, the soldier in him barely leashed beneath the surface. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice a low rumble that carried more compassion than pity. Amelia looked up slowly, her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her throat ached from silence. Finally, she whispered, "You shouldn't be here. If he sees you? She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Ethan stepped closer, careful not to startle her. He won't, he said. They've kept him in the VIP suite for now. For the first time, Amelia seemed to relax slightly. Her eyes flicked to his face, the scar above his right eyebrow, the hard lines etched by years of endurance. He looked like a man carved from stone, but carrying something wounded deep inside. You shouldn't have interfered, she said again, more faintly this time. You don't understand what he's capable of. Ethan's gaze softened. You're wrong, he replied quietly. I understand men like him. I fought them before. She frowned, confused. You're a soldier? He nodded once. Was. Navy SEAL. Afghanistan, Iraq, a few other places I'd rather forget. I've seen what power does to people who think they can't be touched. Amelia's expression shifted. Half disbelief, half empathy. And now you're here, guarding people like him. Ethan gave a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, life's funny that way. He looked toward the window where snow pressed softly against the glass, melting into silver streaks. But tonight reminded me that some battles don't end just because the war's over. Her lower lip trembled. You don't know what it's like to live in fear every day, she said, her voice breaking. To plan every word, every breath, to keep him calm. One wrong look, one misplaced word. She stopped, inhaling sharply as if catching herself from saying too much. If I speak up, he'll destroy me. He'll destroy everyone I care about. Ethan crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. His voice was steady, measured, like a man choosing every word as if it could save or ruin a life. When I was deployed, he began, our convoy got hit outside Kandahar. The desert swallowed everything. Our radios, our trucks, our hope. My team, they didn't make it. I should have died there too. But I didn't. I walked 3 days with a broken leg, dragging myself through the sand. I thought I was finished, but I kept moving. Not because I was brave, because I refused to stop breathing. His eyes locked with hers. You can survive him. You just have to take the first step. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Not the frantic tears of fear, but the slow, aching kind that come when someone finally believes you. She covered her mouth, shoulders shaking, and whispered, Why are you helping me? Ethan looked down, the shadow of old guilt crossing his features. Because someone once needed me to act, and I didn't. The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was the kind of silence where something began to change. A seed of courage, still fragile, but alive. A knock broke the stillness. The door opened slightly, and Naomi Patel peeked in. Her eyes widened at the sight of Ethan. You shouldn't be here, she said softly but firmly, glancing toward the hallway. Marcus is furious. The Cranes' lawyer is already calling the GM. If he finds you alone with her, you'll lose more than your job. Ethan stood slowly. I was just leaving. Naomi's gaze lingered on Amelia, her expression softening. Mrs. Crane, she said gently, I can have a car brought around back if you'd like to leave quietly. Amelia hesitated. She wanted to say yes, to run and never look back. But the invisible chains around her heart were strong. No, she murmured. He'll notice. He always notices. Naomi nodded, the look of a woman who had seen enough of fear to recognize it instantly. She turned to Ethan. You should go before he comes down. He's been asking for you. Ethan's stomach tightened. For me? Yes. Marcus told him you spoke out. He wants to discuss it privately. Naomi's tone made clear what that meant. Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. Let him try. Naomi's eyes widened slightly at the quiet steel in his voice, but she didn't argue. At least go through the service hall, she said quickly. Less attention. As she led him toward the side corridor, Ethan looked back once. Amelia sat still on the sofa, her hand resting protectively on her stomach, her eyes following him with something between gratitude and fear. He gave a small nod before disappearing into the dim hallway. The service passage smelled of detergent and metal. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Ethan walked toward the staff elevators. His limp was more pronounced now. The adrenaline had worn off, and the old injury throbbed like a cruel reminder. He reached the basement level, where the night staff moved quietly between supply rooms. One of them, Tom Nguyen, a young Vietnamese janitor in his mid-20s, looked up as Ethan entered. Tom was small and wiry, with a permanent tired smile and the faint smell of cleaning solution clinging to him. He'd immigrated 3 years ago to support his family back home, working double shifts without complaint. "Rough night, huh?" he said, stacking mop handles. Ethan nodded. "You could say that." Tom frowned, noticing the tension in his face. "You look like you want to punch someone." Ethan smirked faintly. "Maybe." "Just don't do it near the cameras," Tom replied with a grin, unaware of how close to the truth he was. Ethan stopped by the locker room, pulled off his uniform jacket, and sat heavily on the bench. The USB drive was still in his pocket, a small weight that suddenly felt enormous. He turned it over in his hand, thinking about what it represented. Proof, truth, danger. The door creaked open again, and Marcus entered, his face flushed and slick with sweat. "Cole," he barked, "what the hell were you thinking? Crane wants your name. He's threatening to sue the hotel if we don't fire you tonight." Ethan stood, calm but unyielding. "Then fire me." Marcus blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Ethan said, his voice level. "You'll get your statement and I'll walk out, but I won't apologize for stopping a man from hitting his wife." Marcus's face went red. "You think this is some kind of moral crusade? You're a guard, not a hero. You don't take sides." Ethan's jaw clenched. When someone's bleeding, there are no sides. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. Then he threw his hands up, muttering curses. "Fine. You're suspended, indefinitely. Hand in your badge by morning." Ethan nodded once. "You'll get it." Marcus stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ethan sank back onto the bench, breathing deeply. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. Clarity. He had crossed a line tonight, and there was no turning back. Somewhere above him, the sound of luxury cars pulling away echoed faintly through the marble floors. The world would pretend nothing happened. But he wouldn't. He looked down at the small black drive in his palm and whispered to himself. Not this time. The morning light crept over the skyline of New York like a reluctant witness, pale and cold through the fog. The city awoke to its usual rhythm, horns, coffee carts, and rushing footsteps. But in the Blue Horizon Hotel, silence reigned. Behind tinted glass and marble floors, a storm brewed quietly in the offices upstairs. In the general manager's suite, Richard Crane sat with his lawyer, Samuel Dyer, a man whose thin frame and expensive suit hid a soul sharpened by years of courtroom battles. Samuel was in his mid-40s, clean-shaven, his eyes gray like polished steel, and his words cut with surgical precision. He was known in elite circles for one thing, burying scandals before they bled. "We've deleted all footage from the hotel's security system," Samuel said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Every angle, every copy. The hotel IT confirms compliance." Richard leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his temple. He looked exhausted, but not with regret, only fury. The once immaculate businessman now had red veins streaking his eyes, his confidence eroded into paranoia. "And the guard?" he asked. "Suspended indefinitely," Samuel replied. "Management will issue a statement saying he overstepped protocol. We'll make him look unstable. PTSD, poor conduct, whatever sells." Richard smirked faintly, a cruel twitch of satisfaction. "Good. By tonight he'll be nothing more than a bitter veteran with a bad leg and a big mouth." But for all his power, Richard didn't know one thing. Some truths refuse to stay buried. Across the city, Ethan Cole sat in his small apartment in Queens, a modest two-room unit where the radiator clanked like an old soldier refusing retirement. He hadn't slept. The TV flickered faintly in the background, playing early morning news, but he wasn't watching. The USB drive lay on the table beside his coffee mug. Its metal casing reflected the weak dawn light, small, silent, and dangerous. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the dull throb of exhaustion mixed with something sharper. Resolve. His phone buzzed. The caller ID read Jake Porter. Jake had been his brother-in-arms once, a Marine combat correspondent who turned to investigative journalism after a roadside bomb ended his active service. He was in his late 30s, rugged, with a patchy beard and a crooked nose broken twice in the field. His left hand trembled slightly from nerve damage, but his mind was still sharp, relentless. He lived for uncovering what the powerful wanted to hide. "Ethan." Jake's voice crackled over the line, rough but steady. "You sure you want to send me this?" "I'm sure," Ethan said quietly. "Just blur her face. She's been through enough." Jake exhaled. "Got it. I'll verify the footage, run it through authentication. If it's clean, I'll post it with a statement. This isn't just about her, brother. It's about what you did. You stood up." Ethan didn't answer. Right away. The compliment didn't feel like pride. It felt like a burden. "Just tell the truth," he said finally. When the call ended, Ethan looked out his window. Snow from last night still clung to the rooftops. The city below was moving, indifferent, unaware that in a few hours it would witness something it couldn't unsee. By noon, Richard Crane's PR machine was in motion. Paid articles appeared online about his charitable work, his devotion to his wife, and the false rumors spread by disgruntled staff. Anonymous social media accounts defended him viciously, discrediting Ethan's name before his story was even told. But by evening, the tide turned. Jake's post went live at 6:17 p.m. The headline read, "The Night Courage Spoke. Hotel Guard Stands Up to Billionaire Abuse." The article contained screenshots, verified footage, and an account from multiple employees who'd witnessed the event. The 30-second clip showed Richard raising his hand, Amelia recoiling, and Ethan stepping forward with a single line. "She's pregnant. Please stop." Within minutes, it spread like wildfire. 10,000 views became 100,000, then 1,000,000. Comments flooded in, some disbelieving, others enraged, but all watching. At 8 p.m., the first news anchor mentioned it live on national television. A viral video allegedly showing tech mogul Richard Crane striking his pregnant wife has sparked outrage. By midnight, Wiker Justice for Amelia and Farshbot the Silent Guard were trending worldwide. Meanwhile, Ethan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, blocked callers, reporters, and threats. He ignored them all until a knock came at his door. He reached instinctively for the baseball bat near the frame. Old habits from war. When he opened it, Naomi Patel stood there, breathless from the cold. Her blazer was gone, replaced by a thick wool coat, and her dark hair clung to her cheeks from snow. "You need to get out," she said urgently. "What are you talking about?" Ethan asked. "Richard's people. They came to the hotel tonight. They're asking for your address. Marcus said he didn't give it, but I don't know how long he can hold them off." Ethan stared at her, disbelief giving way to grim understanding. He's scared. We all are, Naomi said softly. But what you did, it mattered. People are talking, Ethan. You gave her a voice. He hesitated. And now he'll come after everyone who speaks. Naomi reached into her purse and handed him an envelope. Jake dropped this at the front desk earlier, said it was urgent. Inside was a printed message with an address. Channel 7 newsroom. Meet me before dawn. Ethan nodded, slipping the note into his jacket. Thanks, Naomi. Just be careful, she said. Her voice wavered slightly before she turned and hurried down the icy street, her figure vanishing into the glow of streetlights. By the time Ethan reached the newsroom, the city was eerily quiet. Channel 7's building loomed tall, its glass front glowing blue under the neon sign. Jake was waiting by the side entrance, a cigarette burning between his fingers. Didn't think you'd come, he said with a smirk. I don't run from cowards, Ethan replied. Jake grinned faintly. Same old you. He flicked away the cigarette. You're a headline now, brother. Congratulations. Or condolences. Inside the dim office, monitors flashed with live coverage. Jake pointed at one showing the clip playing in a loop. They're investigating. Police already subpoenaed Crane Dynamics records. Your name's on every major outlet. You're a hero to half the country and a lunatic to the other half. Ethan watched the screen, his jaw tight. I didn't do it to be a hero. I know, Jake said. That's why it worked. A sudden vibration on the desk interrupted them. Jake's phone. He glanced at it, frowning. They found Amelia. Ethan turned sharply. What? She filed a police report tonight. She's under protective custody now. Social services got her to a safe house. She gave a statement, said she wants to testify. Ethan exhaled, relief washing through him like light through smoke. Then it's done. Jake shook his head. It's just beginning. Crane's already filed a defamation suit against the station, against me, and against you. But he's bleeding. The press won't let go now. They stood in silence for a moment, the city beyond the window flickering with distant sirens. Jake looked at his friend and said quietly, You did what no one else would. You lit the match. Ethan turned to leave, the cold air cutting through the lobby as the door opened. Then let's see what burns, he said. Outside, snow fell heavier now, but the night didn't feel dark anymore. Somewhere across the city, a woman was safe, a truth had been freed, and a tyrant was losing control. The world had finally started to watch. 2 months later, the city awoke beneath an uncharacteristically clear sky. The clouds that had hung like guilt over Manhattan seemed to have vanished overnight, leaving the light sharp and merciless, like truth itself. Outside the New York County Courthouse, cameras lined the marble steps, their lenses gleaming as dozens of reporters jostled for position. Microphones sprouted like weeds. Headlines were already written before the verdict was read. The air smelled of coffee, cigarette smoke, and tension. Inside, Ethan Cole stood by the tall window of the witness corridor, his reflection framed against the cold glass. He wore a plain gray suit borrowed from Jake, a little too big at the shoulders, the tie slightly crooked. His hair, longer now, brushed against his collar, streaked with more gray than before. The limp in his right leg was sharper today, the ache amplified by nerves and sleepless nights. But his eyes were calm, the eyes of a man who had finally stopped running from the past. The courtroom itself was a theater of power. Mahogany walls, brass lamps, the American flag hanging behind the bench. Every seat was taken. Journalists, legal aides, and citizens who had followed the trial since the first viral video. Near the front sat Judge Eleanor Hartfield, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pinned in a low bun and an expression that brooked no nonsense. She had a reputation for integrity so fierce that even the city's most seasoned attorneys adjusted their tone in her presence. Her glasses rested low on her nose as she flipped through the case file, her movements precise and unhurried. Richard Crane sat at the defense table, pale beneath the polished glow of his Armani suit. His face, once the image of confidence, was drawn and rigid. The bruise under his left eye had faded, but something deeper had cracked inside him, the certainty of invincibility. Beside him, his attorney Samuel Dyer whispered something under his breath, his silver pen tapping the table in rhythm with his irritation. Across from them, Amelia Crane sat beside her lawyer, Rebecca Morrison, a woman in her mid-40s with tightly coiled auburn hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's. She carried herself like someone who had fought her way through a world designed to dismiss her. Her voice had earned respect in hundreds of courtrooms, and her compassion for domestic abuse survivors had made her both feared and admired. Amelia sat quietly, dressed in a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her hands clasped over her belly, now 8 months pregnant. The faint swell beneath the fabric was both fragile and defiant, the visible proof of survival. When the bailiff called, "All rise," the room obeyed. The sound of wooden benches scraping against marble echoed like thunder. Judge Hartfield glanced over the room before seating herself. "Court is now in session for the case of the People versus Richard Crane," she said firmly. The prosecution began with quiet confidence. Rebecca Morrison stood, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "Your Honor, today we stand not just for Amelia Crane, but for every woman silenced by fear and control," she said, her tone steady but edged with passion. "We will show that the defendant used his power, his wealth, and his influence to abuse and isolate his wife. And we will prove it not with rumor, but with evidence, recordings, medical reports, and testimony from those who witnessed his violence." As she spoke, Ethan watched from the witness section, his fists resting on his knees. He caught Amelia's gaze for a brief second. There was gratitude in her eyes, and something more, a fragile peace, the kind that comes only after surviving hell. Samuel Dyer rose smoothly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, turning towards the jury, his voice velvet but venomous, "this is not a story of abuse. This is a story of manipulation. Mrs. Crane is seeking to destroy my client's reputation and seize his assets under the guise of victimhood. There are no police reports, no witnesses until a low-level security guard with a record of trauma and instability decided to become a hero online." His eyes flicked toward Ethan, cold and condescending. "You will see that emotion does not equal evidence." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Jake, sitting 2 rows behind, muttered under his breath, "That snake." Hours passed as witnesses were called. Hotel staff, medical examiners, digital analysts. Each piece of evidence painted the same story. A man obsessed with control, a woman stripped of freedom, and a night that tore open the facade of perfection. When Ethan's turn came, he rose slowly and walked to the stand. The bailiff handed him the oath card. His voice didn't waver as he said, "I do." He sat, the wooden chair creaking softly beneath his weight. Rebecca approached, her tone respectful. "Mr. Cole, please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of December 14th at the Blue Horizon Hotel." Ethan spoke plainly. "I saw Mr. Crane strike his wife during the gala. She was pregnant. She fell. I stepped in and told him to stop." Rebecca nodded. "Did you record the incident?" "Yes, I copied it from the security feed when I realized it might disappear." "And why did you take that risk?" Ethan's eyes flickered toward Richard, then back to the jury. "Because everyone else looked away." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. When Samuel Dyer took over, his smile was a knife. "Mr. Cole," he began, "you're a veteran, correct?" "Yes." "And you were discharged for injury?" "Yes." "Would you say your experiences affected your mental state?" Ethan didn't flinch. "War affects everyone, but it didn't make me blind to right and wrong." Samuel leaned closer. "Perhaps not blind, but desperate for purpose, maybe even attention?" Rebecca objected. "Speculation." "Sustained," said Judge Hartfield sharply. Samuel clicked his tongue softly, pretending disappointment. No further questions. Ethan stepped down, passing Amelia's table as he returned to his seat. She looked up and mouthed a silent thank you. He nodded once, barely perceptible. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Rebecca inserted a USB drive into the courtroom monitor. The lights dimmed slightly as the footage began to play. The screen showed Richard's hand rising, the gleam of crystal light, the sound of the slap echoing like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The judge leaned forward, her brow furrowing. When the clip ended, silence flooded the room. Even Samuel Dyer looked momentarily stunned. Richard's jaw worked, but no sound came. Amelia took the stand next. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke. She described the years of isolation, the threats, the fear. The room listened in painful stillness. "I stayed," she said softly, "because I thought if I was perfect enough, he'd stop. But he didn't. The night he hit me in front of strangers, I realized he never would." When the final arguments ended, Judge Hartfield recessed the court. The jury returned after 2 hours, a short deliberation for a long nightmare. Everyone stood as the verdict was read. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of domestic abuse, guilty. On the charge of threats to life, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "This is a setup," he shouted. The judge banged her gavel. "Order! Mr. Crane, you will remain silent." Her voice carried the weight of centuries of justice. "Richard Crane, you are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." Amelia's hand flew to her mouth as tears broke free. Ethan felt his chest loosen for the first time in months. He wasn't smiling. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, the cameras outside waited to feast. But inside, under the clean white light of the courtroom, something pure remained, a small, quiet victory. Ethan walked out last, sunlight breaking through the tall windows, washing over him like absolution. He didn't win anything that day. He had simply done what needed to be done. The morning sun broke over the East River like gold spilled across glass, flooding New York in a soft, forgiving glow. The air was crisp with early spring, the kind that carried both chill and promise. A crowd gathered outside a renovated red brick building in downtown Brooklyn, its facade newly painted in pale cream and blue. Above the wide entrance, gold letters shimmered in the sunlight. The Lighthouse Foundation. Ethan Cole stood near the gate, his security badge gleaming on his chest, though he wore no uniform today. Instead, a simple navy suit fit his broad shoulders, his tie loosened just enough to make him look approachable. A faint breeze stirred his short brown hair, now peppered with silver. The limp in his step was still there, but he carried it differently now, with the quiet acceptance of someone who had stopped seeing it as a weakness. He looked up at the sign again, as if to make sure it was real. A year had passed since the trial. Richard Crane was serving his sentence in a federal facility upstate, his empire dismantled piece by piece. Amelia Crane had chosen not to disappear as many victims did. Instead, she had built something new from the ruins. And Ethan, who once believed his life had ended the day he left the battlefield, found himself once again standing guard, only this time not against enemies with guns, but against silence itself. Inside the building, laughter mingled with the aroma of coffee and freshly cut flowers. The entrance hall gleamed with light from tall, arched windows. A mural stretched across the far wall, painted by local artists, depicting a lighthouse shining through a stormy sea, its beam reaching toward a small figure holding a child. Amelia stood near the podium, greeting guests with that serene composure she had slowly rebuilt. She wore a white dress embroidered with silver thread, her golden hair tied loosely at her shoulders. Her face still bore faint traces of the ordeal, fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a kind of grace forged from pain. But her smile was radiant. In her arms, a baby girl cooed softly, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. "Hope," she whispered, kissing the child's forehead. Beside her stood Dr. Lillian Brooks, a woman in her early 50s with short salt-and-pepper hair and kind green eyes. A former psychologist and longtime advocate for survivors, she had joined Amelia in building the foundation from scratch. Lillian had the calm voice of someone who had seen the worst of humanity, yet refused to lose faith in it. Years ago, she'd lost her sister to domestic violence, a grief that had shaped her purpose ever since. "Are you ready?" she asked Amelia gently. Amelia smiled. "As ready as I'll ever be." Lillian adjusted her glasses, glancing toward Ethan. "He's watching the perimeter again, isn't he?" Amelia followed her gaze and saw Ethan standing by the door, scanning the crowd discreetly. "Always," she said softly. "He doesn't say much, but I think this means more to him than he'll admit." Lillian chuckled. "Men like him never stop protecting, even when the war changes." When the ceremony began, the crowd quieted. Reporters, volunteers, and former victims, all seated under a canopy of light filtering through glass, turned their eyes toward the stage. Ethan leaned against a column near the back, his arms folded, watching. Amelia stepped to the microphone. Her voice trembled slightly at first, then found its rhythm. Steady, strong. "A year ago," she began, "I thought my life was over. I thought the darkness had won. But then someone stood up, not because he had power, but because he had courage." Her gaze found Ethan at the back. "A soldier who thought he'd lost his way reminded me that courage begins when silence ends." Applause broke out, not loud or frantic, but heartfelt. Ethan lowered his eyes, embarrassed but quietly proud. He never liked being the center of attention. The battlefield had taught him that the loudest heroes were often the first to fall. Amelia continued, her words flowing like sunlight through cracks. "The Lighthouse Foundation is not just a building, it's a promise that no one will ever face the storm alone again. Here, every woman and child will find safety, dignity, and the chance to begin again." Her voice softened. "And this," she said, glancing down at the baby in her arms, "is my daughter, Hope. She was born 3 months ago, on the coldest morning of winter. But when I looked at her, I realized that even after the longest night, the light always returns." From the back, Jake Porter recorded the speech with his camera. His beard was thicker now, his eyes lined with exhaustion and pride. He had turned Amelia's story into a documentary that won awards and, more importantly, opened doors for thousands of victims across the country. When Amelia finished, Jake caught Ethan's eye and raised a thumb. After the speech, the guests mingled. Reporters interviewed survivors, photographers captured smiles, and for once, the headlines would tell a story not of violence, but of victory. A little boy with freckles tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Mister, are you a real soldier?" Ethan crouched down, smiling. "Used to be," he said. "Now I just help people stay safe." The boy grinned. Like a superhero? Ethan chuckled. Maybe something like that. When the crowd began to thin, Amelia walked over, carrying Hope. You should have stood up there with me, she said. He shook his head. This is your day, not mine. She looked at him, the sunlight catching the gold in her hair. You're part of this too, Ethan. Without you, there wouldn't be a lighthouse. He smiled faintly. Maybe. But I think it was already here. You just needed to see it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as a group of volunteers helped a mother and her teenage daughter through the doors of the shelter. The girl's face was bruised, her eyes hollow, but when she saw the mural on the wall, she stopped and stared. Her mother put an arm around her, whispering something too quiet to hear. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. Later, as the sun began to set, the city bathed in amber light. Amelia sat on a bench outside, cradling Hope while Ethan stood nearby, leaning on his cane. The hum of distant traffic blended with the laughter of children playing in the courtyard. She'll grow up in a better world, Amelia said softly. Ethan looked at the baby, her tiny fingers reaching toward the sky. Because you built one, he replied. Amelia turned to him. No, because we did. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to smile fully, the kind that reached his eyes, the kind that felt like peace. As the last rays of sun dipped below the skyline, the light from the building's sign flickered on, the Lighthouse Foundation, casting a golden glow across their faces. Ethan lifted his gaze to the sky, a gentle wind brushing against his cheek. He finally understood why he had survived the battlefield, why fate had led him to that hotel, that night. It wasn't to fight one more war, it was to protect something worth living for. And as the city lights began to sparkle like stars reborn, Ethan whispered to himself, some battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage, and some victories are quiet, like light breaking after a storm. In the end, this story is more than justice or courage. It's about faith and the quiet miracles that still happen when we choose compassion over fear. Sometimes God doesn't send lightning or angels. He sends people, ordinary, flawed, tired souls, who stand up when silence would be easier. And maybe that is the truest miracle of all, that light can still be born from brokenness, and love can still heal what cruelty once tried to destroy. If you believe the world still has such miracles, share this story with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless you and your loved ones with the strength to be a light in someone's darkness.